Hello everyone, I'm Colin Canet. Today I want to look at some more bad ideas in woodworking, some things to avoid, some things that will make your woodworking more difficult. Some of them are even a little bit dangerous, so you want to make sure to avoid those. And yeah, I'm wearing the new WoodWorkWeb t-shirt. You can check out the details in the description box below. Let's have a look at some bad ideas. So the first idea I want to talk today is having to do with using the circular saw, and particularly when we're using long lumber, and I've got a 2x4 here, an 8-foot long 2x4 that you may want to cut off, and it gets even more dangerous. I also have this very wide, it's 8 inches wide, 2-inch rough cut oak that you might be cutting off as well. And the problem with these long pieces of wood, very often, sometimes they get cupped or warped, or you just want to cut them in half because they're easier to work with. This one is very heavy, and cutting that off, sometimes the easiest thing to do is to use a circular saw. And typically what we do with that is to bring it into our workshop or on sawhorses and just try and cut that off. The problem with doing that, and sometimes we're in an awkward position like I am here. I'm sort of squeezed in, not the best angle. But what happens when you cut off a long board like this and you don't have it supported? What happens is this blade can get pinched. And by the way, this saw is disabled because the battery's out of it. But when this wood falls off, especially a longer one like this one, it can pinch the blade, and when it does, it will startle you because when it pinches the blade, it can kick back. And when it does that, that can be when it's dangerous. That's when people get hurt. That's when they get cut. And it's very common with circular saws. And it's because it doesn't get supported with the part that's getting cut off. And it doesn't matter whether it's a 2x4 or an 8-inch wide piece of oak. Here's the best way to do that. When you're at the lumber store, you can purchase something called rigid foam, and it's a very sturdy product. And the idea with using rigid foam is you can then take the wood that you're cutting and lay it on the rigid foam, and now you've got something to support where you're cutting. Now, if you've been watching my channel at all, you'll know that whenever you're cutting any wood, whether it's on the table saw, a circular saw, and even the sliding miter does the same thing, you don't want the saw, you only want the saw blade to be penetrating the bottom of the wood by about half a tooth. So you always want to readjust the saw blade no matter what the thickness is. In this case, it's just about perfect. So you're only going to be just skimming the top of this. So this plastic or this foam insulation, this stuff will last you forever because you're just going to be skimming the top of it. But when you cut it, so if you're cutting it across here, look at this, even here hanging off this side of the table, it's still supported. So when you cut through, it's not going to drop off and pinch the saw. It's a much safer way of using the circular saw. Is to use something like this rigid foam. You could also use 2x6s underneath that span the distance of it as well. But this will, of course, do wider pieces and long pieces as well. So rigid foam when you're cutting with the circular saw. Okay, I've moved over to the table saw, and I have my old miter gauge here. And what some people recommend is using a engineer's square, which this is, and aligning your miter gauge to the table saw blade. Now, like a lot of things in woodworking, there's exceptions. The only exception that I ever suggest that you can do this is if you're making picture frame materials and you need to check your miter gauge. Now remember, picture frame material is very narrow, it's not wide, and I don't recommend this as a general rule. Everything on a table saw is aligned to the miter slots. The blades are aligned to the miter slots, and the miter gauge is aligned to the miter slots. So get yourself a good quality square, check it to make sure that it's square, and align, get in the practice of doing the right thing, align your miter gauge to this square. And if you do that, it'll automatically be aligned to the blade, because there's a couple problems with trying to align to a blade. First of all, some blades have carbide that is a little proud of the blade, and if you happen to get on a little piece of carbide, the blade is not flush, or the square is not flush with the blade, so that can happen. The other thing is, sometimes these blades get a little bit warped, and sometimes you can't tell that, and you end up aligning a miter gauge to a blade that's already maybe bent or warped. So there's lots of problems with doing that. So always align your miter gauge to the miter slot, and that way you're assured of the best results. I saw this recently somewhere. This sounds like a good idea. You can drill a hole and embed your earth magnet into the side of your push stick, and that way you can attach it to the side of your table saw, and it's for quick and easy retrieval. That's a really bad idea, because what's going to happen, sometime you're going to hit that magnet with your blade, and two things are going to happen. You're going to probably chip the carbide on your blade, and for sure you're going to shatter these earth magnets, because they're sort of an earthen material naturally, and you're going to have pieces flying off at you at 200 or 300 miles an hour. So that's a really bad idea. A much better idea is to make yourself a little holder like this. All it is a block of wood with a slot, really easy to make. You can use 3 pieces of wood and do the same thing. I've embedded some earth magnets in the bottom. It'll sit anywhere in my saw, and my push stick just sits in it. You can put it anywhere that's going to be convenient for you, and you don't have to worry about hitting magnets with your table saw blade. Well, and here is this episode's top worst idea. Of all the bad ideas, this is the worst. First of all, we've got a miter gauge here, and we've got a clamp that's been adapted to it to hold the wood down. And first of all, you never ever use a miter gauge on a router table with a fence, and you would never ever add any kind of a toggle clamp. And I've just put some magnets on there to show you. You never use a miter gauge on a router table when you're using the fence. You always use a push block. I make these ahead of time, and when I square the edges to make sure they're absolutely right, when I check them, I put a line on them so that I know that I've checked it. It's absolutely at right angles, and that's what you use to push through the router bit, and that's what will give you safe, accurate results. Well, that concludes my video for today. And now you have some kind of an understanding when you see things on the internet. Not everything that you see on there is a good idea. So take a minute to have a look at it and make sure that it's safe before you copy it. I'm Colin Cadet for WoodWorkWeb. Thanks for watching.